Okay, maybe we can move to the agenda for today. So today we will hear 3 presentations, as already said, from 3 members of the EOSC Finnish Forum on how EOSC is affecting and how will affect universities and research practices. So we will start with a presentation on reproducible research. That is one of the pillars of open science, and one of the key objectives of EOSC is really to ensure that open science practices and skills are rewarded and become the new normal. After that, we will have a presentation from Tampere University, where we will be discussing and how universities are approaching the digital transformation that EOSC is bringing and will bring in the next year. And finally, we will be closing with also a thematic perspective from a thematic infrastructure, CESSDA. So now I don't want to spend any more time, and I would like to give the floor to the first speaker of today, Josefine Nordling, Open Science Specialist at CSC IT Center for Science. Josefine, the floor is yours, and we can see your presentation properly.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sara. So yes, I'm Josefine Nordling indeed from CSC IT Center for Science. And I am here to present on the reproducibility topic and how ideally the research practices would need to change to accommodate reproducibility. So this is how my presentation is being built up today. So I will be able to capture quite a lot. So first of all, I will introduce to you what reproducibility is, what we mean by reproducibility, where it is applicable, when, and also how actually. After this, I will mention a few words about the reproducibility crisis, as I believe you cannot talk about reproducibility without bringing up the crisis issue around the topic. And next, I will dedicate some time to present the knowledge exchange report on reproducible research that was released late last year. So it includes mostly practices around publishing reproducible research outputs, but also more specifically about the research practices that needs to change. And I will also address some benefits and challenges of reproducibility, as well as the tools and infrastructures that apply. And towards the end, a short takeaway messages presentation that they found in that study that Knowledge Exchange did. And lastly, I will tie together the discussion to the EOSC and what the EOSC service portfolio has to contribute in terms of reproducibility and services that are compatible with reproducibility. So in short, what is reproducibility and what do we mean with it? So it means that you can use the same data and possibly computer codes as well, and rerun the same analysis and still get the same result. So if you compare reproducibility with replicability, so there it's a little bit different. So with replicable research, you can run different data and possibly with different methods as well. And there you also complete a new analysis totally and get the same results. So these are basically the basic differences between these two approaches. Okay, so here you have quite a lot of things going on. So we have the research process, and the more of the research cycle that is available and accessible, the more reproducible and verifiable research you will have. A paper that only presents the output, but a format that is gaining a lot more traction during the recent years has been the research compendium. So the research compendium, it combines data and code. with also information about the environment in which they are found and worked with. But they also provide usage information and a license. And the research compendium is very beneficial that you can also make it executable. So you can allow full reproduction of research work or a research project just by the click of a single button. But also code is a very vital part of reproducibility and the whole process needed. A proper basic understanding of programming is very useful in order to find, store, interpret, reuse, but also document data. And it is really the first step towards making research reproducible. And large data sets can also be a reason why a researcher would need to use a programming language such as the R or Python. But unfortunately, it doesn't. It's not enough to just have the codes in place. We would also need to go a bit beyond that. So also making software references to software used, so licensing the software, and also finding ways to publish the software itself is also something that adds up to the reproducibility practices. But making science really reproducible requires a fully open, adequate combination of data and software, and with good version control. So you really need to own up to the sort of the whole palette of data management. So quite many requirements apply. So this is certainly a huge challenge to tackle. So this picture, it really says a lot. It says a lot about the open science landscape and reproducibility, and the ways in which research practices need to change to accommodate open science and reproducibility. So on the left-hand side, you can see the research evaluation system as it has been in the past, but also and arguably how it still looks like in most countries, where the individual researcher is in primary focus, as well as individual performances. Below, you can see many loose items floating around that have not been very much connected at all to the research assessment or promotion. The outputs have been focused on quantities, on the H index and on the impact factors and amount of funding received. And to a large extent, it has also been closed. And so with the Open Science Program there in the middle, which has been initiated by the Utrecht University, you can see that a lot has been happened in that university in the recent time. You can see that, for example, the way that research has been rewarded and recognized has been taken into account there. You can also see on the right-hand side of the picture that the research, pretty much the research career path of the future, where team science is more in focus. And this also reflects a lot on how research in reality is done as a team effort. Here also other factors are taken into account and being recognized, such as leadership and professional performance. And the outcome of this type of research is usually quality-based. It is based on openness wherever possible. It allows narratives and appropriate metrics to evaluate the research, and it adds to the societal impact as well. So on to the rather depressing reproducibility crisis topic. So here just a few percentages. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Nature did a rather large survey a few years ago on reproducibility. It's rather old, but I do believe that this crisis is still there, very much so. So it showed that 90% of the survey participants, the researchers, they think that a reproducibility crisis is a fact. And more than 70% of researchers have failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments. But furthermore, more than 60% experienced failure in reproducibility due to pressure, different kinds of pressure. So in this case, to publish, but also selective reporting. And another analysis estimates that up to 85% of biomedical research efforts are being wasted. So that's rather disturbing. Some few more findings. So here you can also see that almost 20% felt pressure to publish on certain findings. Around 30% felt pressure to support a mentor's hypothesis, even when the data wasn't really supporting that. Almost 50% knew of someone who had required their lab members to publish first in a high impact journal before being able to move on in their research careers. Some more statistics, I think we can skip those for now. So let's move over to the knowledge exchange publication that was recently published. It was published in around November, December last year. It's called The Art of Publishing Reproducible Research Outputs. And so there they had a qualitative study done. So they did a rather extensive literature review, and they interviewed selected stakeholders. I need to check which stakeholders. So they interviewed research funding organizations, research performing organizations, learned societies, researchers, so both junior and senior ones, academic publishers, and infrastructure and service providers. So as I said, this report, it covers, focuses mostly on the publishing side, but it also covers lots of useful findings on relevant tools and practices that accommodates for reproducible research. Okay, so here you can see a picture of the knowledge exchange open science framework with its 3 levels of actors. So in the macro level, we have the research funding organizations. In the meso level, we have the research performing organization. And lastly, the micro level is where the researchers reside. So it's very important to note that all levels play an equally important role in advancing issues around reproducibility. But what the researchers can already do is to foster and apply reproducible workflows, which means that they can collect data and code and do general data curation. The researcher can furthermore share research objects alongside publications. And lastly, the researcher can include the reproducibility aspect when they are peer reviewing. So there are obviously lots of things that can already be done to further this. So here I would like to present a few pros and cons of reproducibility. So first of all, the benefits, they speak for themselves, but they reproducibility adds confidence in the accuracy of findings and results. It also enables the researcher to spin further on the work of others. And most importantly, it increases the transparency, openness, and trust in science. And some of the challenges that were picked up by the qualitative study, is that there are currently no incentive mechanisms in place motivating to do reproducible research, but also the evaluation metrics, they mostly focus on quantity and impact and not so much on quality and reproducibility. And related to technical skills, there is not enough training and mentoring to be able to master all things that are required related to, for example, coding and computing analysis. And there is also a serious interoperability issue where different infrastructures are not really exchanging information on a sufficient level currently. And lastly, related to reporting standards, so sharing code, data, and methods is currently not made mandatory. And then a few words about the available tools and services. A wide range of the tools and infrastructures supporting research reproducibility are already available. In the box above on the left-hand side, you can see the general purpose tools. And in the box below, you can see the tools and infrastructures with a specific purpose. The research compendia comprises of a few of those. So for example, ReproZip tool, the whole tail, and the RC, which is a Zenodo community. And then we have, for example, executable research articles supporting tools such as eLive, and lastly, badging systems, for example, Cascade. So many of the tools that you can see on the right-hand side, they cater to computational reproducibility. And this is maybe a bit biased because those that were interviewed were able to identify the tools that they are using because they, in fact, are using those tools a lot in their everyday research work. Well, here is, here you can see a few of the type of tools that are needed according to researchers to advance reproducibility, but it's a rather low number of contributors to this study, so that's to be taken into account as well. So data management, data sharing, and code sharing infrastructure is mostly needed. So lastly, I want to present a few key takeaway messages from this study. So we have 5 of those that were also published in the form of a short blog post. So first of all, reproducibility has to be thought of as a long-term goal, where you have the concepts and terminologies in place, and these need to be discussed among different communities to make sure that we have a coherent terminology in place that all communities can understand. Yes, so according to the qualitative study, this is something that is more and more starting to occur, so that sounds promising. Secondly, there is a need for a bottom-up approach to shape policies that support reproducible research practices. This is due to the fact that naturally there are huge differences between the different communities in terms of standards and methods that are used. And this image here on the right-hand side shows exactly at which stages this policy development work is to be taken place in order to correctly be understood and supported by key stakeholders. And the key stakeholders are, in this case, RPOs, RFOs, publishers, and service providers. And just to give a short example, it was found in the literature review that currently no funders require reproducibility. The only exception was NWO in the Netherlands, where they at least mentioned reproducibility there. And publishers are seem to be very afraid to include reproducibility requirements as they fear that it might affect the submission rates in a negative manner. But we can see some progress here as well, definitely. And thirdly, reproducibility. It should be sort of baked into everything that is done within research, so the everyday research process, so that it becomes a norm and the way to do things within science. But these efforts are still considered as rather time-consuming and efforts that adds on top of everything else. So we really need the incentives here to make a change. But it is, however, not very easy to change things in this respect, because it really requires good data management practices on all levels. And these skills are preferably to be developed early on in the research career. And this, of course, in turn also helps with the reproducibility aspects. And here also, especially the FAIR principles come into play. And lastly, as you all know, there are lots of tools and infrastructures available already to support good research data management practices. And researchers are generally quite aware of these services, but that's not really the problem in the end. The problem is that the interoperability between the systems is not at a very advanced stage currently, and hinders reproducible research workflows. And lastly, I promised to tie this presentation to the EOSC and EOSC services provided. So this is what the EOSC service portfolio looks like, which enables you to search either by scientific domain or category. And I lifted up a few examples of services that support reproducibility in a good way. So we first of all have the NOMAD, Novel Materials Discovery Repository. That is an infrastructure for computed material data. It includes input and output files of all important codes. So the NOMAD repository also considers semi-long-term preservation, keeping data stored for at least 10 years. DOIs are also provided on request to make the data citable. They also offer a NOMAD AI toolkit. It hosts open access notebooks, which allows to reproduce results published in scientific journals. Then we have Praise Code Vault, an open repository for high performance computing code samples. Then there is the Cloud Faro Finder tool. It allows, for example, finding data products stored in a repository. And also you can choose to find, for example, processes at a selected time with selected cloud coverage levels. Lastly, wanted to lift up the LifeWatch ERIC repository, eco portal of ecological semantic resources. It enables data enrichment, interoperability, and thus also reproducibility workflows. So that was the last slide I had. So I guess we have a few minutes time for questions, if there are any. Maybe I stop sharing at this point.
Yeah,
thank
you very much, Josefine. And I see one hand raised. Helena, please, if you have any questions.
Thank you. I'm part of a CESSDA data archives project where we have handled these issues also. And well, for other data archives in CESSDA, reproducibility is the word they use. But in FSD, we have been thinking pretty much about this because we anonymize data, that is, or the researchers anonymize, and we check the anonymization when the data comes into FSD. And after that, already reproducibility is perhaps not possible. So we would rather talk about verifiability. It's important that you can check that the data really exists and it's possible to get this type of result using it. But if you try to keep the reproducibility, then it would possibly limit the reuse of the data. So that's what we have been thinking here in FSD.
Yes, thank you. That's a really good point also, that there are so big differences between these scientific communities. So there would have to be this kind of tailored solutions to accommodate everything. So that's a really good point that you lifted up, and good to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. Are there any other questions for Josefine? I don't see anything in the chat. And not even. I had one question, Josefine, because you mentioned the knowledge exchange, but maybe I don't know if everyone is familiar with the knowledge exchange. Maybe you can say briefly what it is. And also, I mean, knowledge exchange came up with those recommendations or findings. Are you doing or are you planning to do any activities in the context of knowledge exchange to bring this forward?
Well, that's a really good question. Yes. So Knowledge Exchange, it's an international network where we have 6 partner organizations involved. So we have CESSDA from Finland, then we have DIKE from Denmark, we have CNRS from France, we have JISC from the UK, we have SURF from the Netherlands, and DFG from Germany. So we are all pretty similar-minded organizations that are all trying to advance infrastructure, information infrastructures in different ways. We focus especially on open science and open access advancements. It's a really lean organization, as it's really acts on the terms of all partner organizations involved. And regarding this continuation of, you mean of this particular topic. So actually, knowledge exchange usually like to bring up topics that are not really addressed by anyone else. So that's a really good question about the sustainability. So we have strategies made up for 4 years at the time. So we currently are revisiting the strategies to see what we would like to add as additional strategies for the years to come. But actually that activity has finished with its final report in the end of last year. But we are doing something quite similar in another working group that looks at reproducibility from another perspective. So they also take into account fair data and fair software and how these support reproducibility. So that would be sort of the follow-up to the other activity at this point.
Because I think that some of these outputs, for example, could be a very good input for the EOSC Association task forces. There are a couple of groups in particular that would be benefiting from this type of work. So I invite you to share this information with them as well, because I'm sure that they will appreciate that. Okay.
Yes, and I can add a link to the relevant reports as well into the chat if desired. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Josefine. I think it's time to move to the next presentation, which actually for which we have 2 speakers from University of Eastern Finland. So the first speaker is Niina Nurmi, Project Planner for Data Management Support Services. And the second one is Manna Satama Information Specialist, both, as I said, from University of Eastern Finland. So I think you can start sharing your screen. And I leave the floor to you.
Great. Here we go. In fact, I will start speaking and Niina will continue.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to tell about our experiences on EOSC and the data management support services and developing those services. My name is Manna Satama, and I work as an information specialist at the library of the University of Eastern Finland, with a background as a researcher and records management. And Niina will introduce herself.
So I'm Niina Nurmi, and I work as a colleague of Manna at the library at UF, and I work as a project planner for developing the UF data management support services. And I have background in biological sciences, so some research experience through that.
Okay, and then just a couple of words about our university and the library, and then I move on to the development project, and then Niina will continue. University of Eastern Finland is a multidisciplinary university with 4 faculties, as you can see. The biggest faculty is Faculty of Health Sciences. This also means that the research data that we have at the university can be almost of anything. We operate on 2 campuses, in Kuopio and Joensuu, that is in 2 different cities. The UF library coordinates the open science stuff at the university. We have a new steering group for open science where the library is well represented. The library takes an active role in national work that promotes open science, and also works quite tightly in international collaboration, as is this EOSC Nordic and UFering project. The library also coordinates a project where we work with Niina, developing research data management support services. This project started a bit over a year ago, February 21, and continues until the end of this year. The development project was something that we came in with Niina to work at UF. We came outside the university. So first thing that we started to do was to figure out the data support that already existed and how the renewed support services at the university would look like. Our aims for the project included the delineating roles, responsibilities, and resources for the services. And as you can see from the figure, the services are provided by different units at the university. There are library, there are law, IT services, data protection, and so on. We also wanted to improve the visibility of services. And last, to have a better linking of third-party service providers, including the national service providers such as Language Bank and Finnish Social Science Data Archive, CSC, and also EU-level solutions such as EOSC. We started to sort of sketch the connections between the different units that provide services inside the university. That is, which unit is connected to which in between them. First internally inside the university, and then also which units are connected to the third-party service providers. And as you can see, the library is quite busy with these connections. It is connected with everybody apart from EOSC. And this was our first sort of idea that how this looks like. And we sort of thought with Niina that perhaps our perception was perhaps influenced by the fact that EOSC has this logo symbol with a cloud. It has a word cloud. So it's perhaps part of it's sort of our IT services take care of the EOSC connection. So we sort of left it a bit on the side. Well, now we are in the development project phase with piloting these renewed services. We start to compile a new website for the UF data support. And then we start to think that where and how to place information about third-party service providers. For example, how to present CSC or language bank, etc. We also have started to participate in answering these research data management service requests with Niina. That's something that we didn't do last year. So we also have a sort of a more concrete idea about how much we ourselves should know about these third-party service providers and when to direct the customer to contact the providers themselves directly. So we think about what is UDAT, data sharing, archiving, how to find trustworthy solutions, how much time and effort we can put in finding these trustworthy solutions ourselves, or should we have some other place to look after them, to look for them. We have also marketed our renewing RDM services, and that bears fruit. We have a request for a tailored training to a certain research group, and they want to find, for example, to know where to open their code and how does our own e-repository link to every other services. And this is a point where we sort of return to the questions of EOSC. Do we grasp it? Should a researcher understand EOSC? And this is where I leave the floor to Niina.
Thank you, Manna, for the beginning of the presentation. So I take over here, and just to continue from this where we were left in the piloting phase. So we were then giving a tailored training for our UF researchers. And in this case, it's a disciplinary specific training over opening the software and how to license software. And this was presented for atmospheric researchers. And so this is just a screenshot from one of our training slides. So it's kind of opening up a bit about what the research support personnel is then doing the background work to figure out the different connections. So we have national solutions and international solutions, and the arrows are kind of presenting that it's quite a complicated network of linkages. And so in this case, we were figuring out to tell researchers what is actually the UF e-repository, because there's often a misconception that you can directly deposit your research data there. But in fact, we try to emphasize that it's a system for harvesting metadata. So we have different resources where the metadata ends up into UF e-repository. So some of these are, for example, ECOS and Pangea. So Pangea is an actual data repository, and it has a connection with EUDAT, which is because there's a community of Pangea community for EUDAT. And then what we look through ECOS is more like infrastructure, and we see a connection with EUDAT again. And so actually on the ECOS website, there is no EUDAT logo, but it is kind of implicit that people know that B2Find, for example, is a tool associated with EUDAT. So there's a lot of background work that we kind of do because we kind of want to give like the correct impression to the researchers of the data flow. But of course, there's not so much of the detail that the researcher always needs to know. They need to actually find the right tools than what they use, for example, whether they deposit their data to Pangea, etc. And so if we go to the next slide, then actually then when we have, after this training session, when we have become more also aware of incorporating the EOSC portal and EOSC marketplace, what we realized after post-training is that, for example, there is a direct association between EUDAT infrastructure and EOSC, for example, because when we look at from the EOSC marketplace, we find through a search that EUDAT is part of the portfolio. So there's a clear presentation of services. But on the left-hand side of the slide, if we look, it's a bit more cryptic association. If you look from the provider website, from the EUDAT website, so that would be the first place I would probably go to when I construct the training session. So what we see is then that the EUDAT is collaborating with EOSC, and is kind of a way to make kind of the open science tools available through the EOSC. So that is just like an example where there is a bit imbalance, that it usually on the provider side, it's not so explicit that that the provider is also available on EOSC Marketplace. So then on the next slide, what we have is that when we look at from the beginning of our project, what was our perception of the third-party services, that it's actually funny to realize that we put all these providers kind of side by side, that actually there is a very kind of more structure to this, that it's a kind of a pyramid scheme in a sense that, and there are much more connections to EOSC, that also Language Bank of Finland, for example, is indirectly connected to the EOSC Marketplace through the Claria and Clarion search. So there is a link there, and also the FSD, of course, the ILA tool that we give training to researchers about ILA and FSD, that this is also findable via the EOSC portal. And then finally, of course, CSC services, for example, ePOTA can be found from the EOSC Marketplace. So this is all kind of post thinking that we didn't make this connection beforehand. And of course, EUDAT and CSC has also linkage, because EUDAT or CSC is kind of coordinating EUDAT infrastructure and tools in Finland. So there is a lot of kind of layering and structuring and interconnectedness on national and international level between these services. And so actually EOSC is kind of as an umbrella of all of these other service providers and solutions. So then if we go to the next slide, we realize that our awareness is increasing about the role of EOSC and what it can be used for. And also this is kind of our thoughts about future training slide, actually, that we have realized that many services and infra are findable via the EOSC Marketplace and here, or they have an indirect linkage, and this can be much better used for raising awareness when we give training sessions. And we can also think about whether to give a separate training session on EOSC per se, or whether we incorporate information and mention EOSC during these associated services. So we also see that Zenodo is incorporated to EOSC, and of course, when you open code, there is linkage between Zenodo and Dryad, for example, because in Dryad you can't deposit software or code, you use Zenodo, so they have a partnership. But it also emphasizes that as a research management support staff, there is a lot of kind of background knowledge that there goes time into figuring out all this kind of interconnectedness. So then on the next slide, if we see that what we realize that we have been using kind of this bottom-up approach where we really make the tailored training and we go from the details upwards, and then we realize, okay, for example, EUDAT and data sharing. So we look for information on the EUDAT side, but actually whether we should try to, by incorporating EOSC, we could be more using a top-down approach where we actually get more familiar with the EOSC Marketplace and check whether a service or a tool can be found from the EOSC portal, and then kind of take this big picture first and then incorporate this into our trainings. And so on the next slide, what we see also is that this is maybe it's a minor detail, but it's maybe like a challenge. And in the beginning, it's also worth noting that there are a few different sites where your first can be a source of confusion when you do background search, that there is actually EOSC portal and there is an EOSC Marketplace. And if you do a search on the portal, it can give different information about a tool or a service when you do like a free search. But it's actually then from the Marketplace, you get the tailored information about if you're looking for infrastructure but then this links also to whether the researcher themselves should be guided to the EOSC Marketplace, or if the research support, research management, data management supports personnel should kind of be the one who is using the portal more and then giving the information to the researcher. And so on the next slide, I think this links to what I said before about the role of EOSC in terms of research groups. And this is actually a nice kind of, this is an adapted screenshot from the site of the DCC, so Digital Creation Center, and they have actually, if you see on the lower hand, there is EOSC participation, and it's marked with a question mark for research groups. And here we can also say that, of course, there are different roles at the EOSC marketplace. So we have providers and users. So I guess research groups can be considered more the users of the marketplace, but perhaps they could be providing their solution, maybe a software that they develop and provide it via the EOSC portal. So I think this is not also clear from this DCC list whether this is considering research group as a user or provider, etc. And so this also links to the fact about how and what to train researchers and research groups about the EOSC and what is the extent. But in the end of the day, I think the take-home message on one level is that both the RDM staff and researchers need training on some level and need awareness. And so then finally, I will let Manna to summarize our first part of the take-home messages here, and then I will wrap up in the end.
Thanks. So we started with the development of RDM support services. And then we tend to have emphasis on the internal processes, and the understanding and linking the role of third-party services may receive less focus. And linking the third-party service providers requires also quite a lot of understanding the interconnectedness between the different solutions, different service providers and platforms, and they are not necessarily that explicit.
So then it's the final point, changing the viewpoint is what we kind of have come to, and that the many services and tools that are familiar to us and used by our research are really available already via the EOSC marketplace, and it's continuing developing place either way, so that's increasing all the time. There is more awareness and more products coming available. And so what we noted in the past slides is that some of our unawareness about the EOSC connection may be partly due to kind of one-way marketing and information. So we visit provider sites where the mention or the linkage is not always so clear. So this is kind of the bottom-up approach. But if we visit the EOSC marketplace and really start from there, then it's really apparent that what can be found there. And so we should really start using it more and really making more advantage of that resource. And also in the end of the day, so both us, so the research data management support staff and the researchers, we need a certified, verified services and information about how to put open science in practice. And so the EOSC marketplace really functions as a reliable site to find updated and clear information about the services and solutions. And it has really a guaranteed seal of approval and trust. So I think that is a good message to wrap up our talk here. And thank you for your attention. And we can take questions also if you have some.
So thank you very much, Manna and Niina. I think you did an amazing presentation. I mean, you have been able to summarize in 10 minutes the complexity of EOSC in the eyes of an institution or research support staff. And from my side, I'm going to pass this presentation directly to the board. And there is a task force of the association working on clarifying things for researchers and research institutions. And I think that this is a very good input. And I fully agree with you with the points that you picked about the confusion of the cloud symbol. So this is causing amazing confusion in the community because everyone thinks that EOSC is a cloud platform, but it's not. Actually, it's about data. And this is very bad from a communication perspective. Also your question about should the researcher be aware of EOSC, that's something that we are also discussing, and we will be discussing in the board in the next months, because probably the answer is no, not necessarily. Not necessarily the final researcher needs to know that the UDAT services or another service is part of EOSC. As long as the service is supporting its research, that's fine. But they also, I really like the attempt that you tried in clarifying the connections. And I fully agree with you that that should be more clear, as well as the role of the marketplace. So for me, this was really enlightening. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know, I mean, I see other messages in the chat where other people are congratulating you for your analysis, and I cannot do anything else than echo this. I'm just asking the audience if they have any other questions for Manna and Niina. If not, then I suggest that we go to the last speaker, and then maybe we can pick some questions at the very end as well. So last but not least, we have another representative from an institute, but that will also provide us a thematic perspective from the Finnish Social Science Data Archive and CESSDA, Helena Laaksonen, Director and of FSD and Chair of the CESSDA General Assembly. Helena.
Thank you, Sara. Okay, this will take a little bit of time to start sharing the correct screen. Oh, it's not starting the slideshow at all. No.
Yes, perfect.
Now you see the slide and not the notes site.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much. And I must say the earlier presentation was really good. Yeah, I've been reading and hearing about EOSC so much, and this was perhaps the clearest presentation ever. So thank you once more. Okay, but as already mentioned, I'm Helena Laaksonen. I'm Director of FSD, Finnish Social Science Data Archive, and Chair of CESSDA General Assembly. And I'm not here to talk so much about FSD or CESSDA, a little bit of them, but my point is more to call for a thematic perspective for approach to EOSC. Okay, and then I will talk about well, what is the mission or purpose of FSD and CESSDA in relation to EOSC, and my point will be much about support for long-term access to data and research, other research items. So this is the content, and let's go to the actual content then. Okay, so there are a lot of people who know what is Finnish Social Science Data Archive. It was already mentioned in the presentation before, but I still tell you that it's a national mission of Tampere University, University of Tampere earlier, and it has been in function since 1999. FSD is also national service provider for CESSDA ERIC, and we are an expert organization on survey data and qualitative data, which is often textual data, but not exclusively textual data in our case. And an important point is that it's collected for research purposes. So it's not, we are not just hoarding all type of material in, but it has connection to research already done, or at least reporting purposes where surveys are also collected. Okay, CESSDA is well, as you see the name, you know why we are not eager to talk with the whole name, but rather use the acronym. So Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives. And ERIC is European Research Infrastructure Consortium, which is a legal identity type under European legislation, under European law. CESSDA is a distributed infrastructure, and it means that it does not reside in one place, but it has national service providers such as FSD in all of the member countries, but it also has central services which have been created and are created as we speak by the central organization, the main office, which is in Bergen, Norway, and also the service providers are very much involved in creating of these services, such as data catalog or data management guide or data archiving guide. CESSDA services are directed to research community, but they are also directed to the service providers. So it's a community that helps each other to excel in this field of data archiving and data sharing. There are currently 22 members and 1 observer, which is about to become member soon. There are also 12 partner countries, partner organizations. Russia is no longer a partner since the invasion into Ukraine, but CESSDA has cooperation with their Ukrainian partners still, even if difficult. We are finding ways how to safeguard Ukrainian datasets. Currently, CESSDA is member of EOSC Association, and representatives of CESSDA are in the task forces and advisory groups. So, for example, Mari Kleemola from FSD is in the advisory group for metadata and data quality, and she's there as a representative of CESSDA, not so much representative of Finnish Social Science Data Archive or Tampere University. So our position in relation to CESSDA and EOSC is also a bit layered already. Okay, so to the actual point of this presentation then, what is the purpose and mission of CESSDA, and as a member or service provider of CESSDA, also the purpose of FSD in EOSC. As already mentioned, we think that we need thematic layers in EOSC so that we can serve discipline-specific requirements of academic communities. In our case, this is of course social sciences and humanities disciplines, and very often social sciences. CESSDA has been very much involved and a leading force in SHOC, which is social sciences and humanities open cloud. Used to be EU-funded large project where established existing infrastructures and also new infrastructures have been working to foster interdisciplinary research and collaboration. The project ended in April, if I remember correctly, but this research infrastructure cooperation will continue. The ERICs of SSH disciplines have already signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, about this cooperation. And there are currently going on and also in the planning stage some wider cross-disciplinary projects where CESSDA and also FSD is involved. Well, the purpose is to get meaningful and worthwhile European infrastructure for researchers within EOSC. Actually, I think what Manna and Niina were a bit wondering before, I think that we should not bother the researchers too much about EOSC as an organization, because as you saw already, it's layered and complicated. Of course, they should be aware of it, but it's kind of well, for example, if I talk about CESSDA and FSD, then researchers in Finland will ask me, how do I get my data to this CESSDA? And then I have to tell them that, well, when you put your data in FSD, this is CESSDA in Finland. So partly we are also working, building EOSC in that way. So it's complicated, and I think the researchers should be just led to concentrate on excellent research. They should be producing that, but of course they can't be completely unaware about EOSC. Okay, let's see then. Yes, well, the projects and the thematic layer, I think it's kind of like we are building our own corner within EOSC. Sorry, and it's of course it's not separated from the other parts of the sorry again the other parts of the open science cloud. It must be interconnected, and with the thematic knowledge, we can make it interconnected with other disciplines, and the projects that we are and CESSDA service providers are involved in they are contributing to this effort. Okay. Time. Okay, then what is needed actually? What do we mean about the thematic layer, and well, how do we build it, and what does it really mean? One main thing about it is that we need to support long-term access, not only long-term preservation of data and research items. We also need to have trusted repositories. And how do you know that it's a trusted repository? Core Trust Seal certification is one way of knowing that the repository you are using is trusted. And Core Trust Seal, very simply put, it tells that your repository implements the fair data principles responsibly. Sorry again. So then what you need to put fair into practice. to provide long-term access. I think a discipline-specific expertise is needed to share and preserve data so that reusability is the best possible from the researcher's point of view, but not only from the researcher's point of view, but also, for example, legally sustainable. For that, we need many standardized things. So I would actually point to the last point in my list, to the standardized archival processes. And they include all of these tools that we built, standardized metadata, DDI, which is Data Documentation Initiative, which is a concerted effort of data archives, data experts from North America, Europe, and all over the world. So it's something we share, and it allows a deep dive into metadata and data contents. Controlled vocabularies are also important to allow interoperability and findability. Also, persistent identifiers. We also need to standardize data processing, and it includes anonymization, or in some cases pseudonymization. And all of this cannot be done by researchers, and I don't know how to put it. Well, the point actually that I'm trying to make here, I think, is to you cannot just dump data and other research items like they are garbage that you put into a reservoir. You should place everything there in a controlled way and make it clear and fair so that you find it, can access it and reuse this material. And the thematic layer makes this kind of a deep dive possible, and it keeps it this way for long period also. And long period from our point of view is not 10 years, not 20 years, it's longer, forever if possible. So you are not supposed to stumble in old wrecks of data there when you go to EOSC, but rather everything is clear to see and find and reuse. This way you can use all the reuse potential also that is in the data and data material. Have I said everything? I guess so. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena, for this presentation. It was very interesting. And actually, I think all your consideration on the long-term access, so these are really fitting well with the work of the long-term preservation task force of the association. So are these topics or effort that CESSDA is in particular investigating, or are you doing that also in collaboration with the other clusters from other domains?
Yes, there are such projects which are together with other domains, such as the by-COVID, where there are, well, several other disciplines also present.
Okay, and more or less you all I mean, there is an agreement, a consensus on this from also other disciplines, or you think this is specifically related to your discipline?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
So,
what did you mean?
The consideration, for example, on the long-term access, these things and so on. So do you think that these are peculiarity of your discipline, or this is shared among all the different disciplines?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'm not natural scientist, of course. I'm a sociologist, but I think we don't know the potential of all the data that's preserved now. It could have uses also after 100 years. When you think of climate data, all kinds of climate data, that's one example that comes to my mind. So not only. Okay, now I find this stop share. Sorry, I was looking for the stop share for a while.
No worries. So are there any questions for Helena, or at this point in time, we can also take any other questions also on the previous presentations, or any comments? I don't know if we have representatives from other universities, for example, and maybe you want to share your views if you also encounter the same challenges that have been described so far. I don't see any hand raised, even in the chat. Okay, so I think that if there are no any other comments or questions, I just want to thank once again all the speakers. I really thank you very much for this. This was really useful, I believe. And as I said, I mean, from my side, I will try to pass the main messages to the board and into the association task forces. And well, I believe we will be organizing some other thematic webinars in the autumn. So in the autumn, there will be this big EOSC symposium event, so in November. And I can also pre-announce that we are probably working for another more regional in the Nordic, EOSC events to discuss a bit how we are aligning among countries, but we will keep you informed. And I hope to see you in one of the next webinars. Thank you very much again, and also thanks to the participants. And I wish you a lovely summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.